Well, it's just about 1:30 in the morning. I'd like to welcome you all to the first broadcast of INN. It's been a couple of years. We've been trying to get the channel started. I should say I have been trying to get the channel. There's sort of the corporate we here, not that there is other people. Um, but at long last, the first broadcast is here. INN is going to be is not going to be mainstream in the sense that we don't have any corporate funders, we don't have any political funders, and any funding that we do bring in is what I guess what you call a blind fund. That means we try not to have it impact or affect any of the research that goes on here. So all the research is independent. Uh, we gather news from over 30 different sources. I've got close to 30 different sources that I get my news from, including the major broadcasters. So I can give you what most broadcasters can't give you. And we will look at not only one side of things, but we'll look at all the sides of things. And you can make your own decisions as to what's going on. Tonight's broadcast and the daily broadcast you will see every night, typically after midnight, after all of the news has gone past, we will come out with this is our media watch daily headlines. This is going to be on a daily basis. We are going to be trying to produce. I'm going to try to reproduce at least a documentary every other week on particular issues that are of concern. So without further ado, let's get to today's issues, today's headlines. Well, the biggest headline that has been on everybody's channel today, as you've sort of flipped around the channels to Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, Fox, all of them. The big focus today was on the American presidential election, the Republican primary race known as Super Tuesday, where this was supposed to be a decisive battle, and it's supposed to be a decisive win for Mitt Romney. It wasn't. What ended up happening today is the field is as open as it always has been. And so right now you have basically Romney, Santorum, Newt Gingrich, and Ron Paul. All of them looks like they're going down to the convention floor for the Republican nomination convention, and it may end up going all the way down to the convention. This is what it looks like. What it looks like now is that things are going. That these four will be there all the way to the convention, and that the decision will occur on the convention floor. I don't think that anyone will get a decisive enough lead over the other to say that things aren't going to be decided on the floor. So this is what it seems like what's happening. As I've sort of flipped around the channels and looked at my different sources, there seems to be as it's been pointed out, they're duking it up. This is politics at its rawest. It's basically a street brawl, and it's going to be the last man standing type of thing. And if you watch a lot of these, CNN, and INN is not like this at this point in time. We don't have flyby graphics. We don't have a soundtrack, and there's no dramatic music in the background. If you watch CNN, I watched CNN tonight along with BBC and Fox, and I also did a bit of from online. I was able to get Al Jazeera and Sky News and a variety of other different networks as they were reporting this. What CNN did, and Fox does this as well, is they have a lot of this dramatic music that they play in the background. And it's almost like if you've been to one of those boxing matches, or you see, if for those of you who don't know, or if you have seen these monster truck rallies where they talk about, in the voice, Sunday, 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 and they go out and they're very enthusiastic about things, very dramatic in their voice, a lot of dramatic music popping up. These are the things that kind of were in the broadcast today. Lots of really interesting stuff that came out in terms of where each candidate stands. But it also pointed out that as you looked at the various different sources, that the Republican Party itself is now very fractured. It's not monolithic, or as monolithic, or in one step and one goose step as you would see with the Obama Democrats. The Obama Democrats seem to be more united on a lot of issues like the environment, on the social left issues. They seem to be very, this is where they are, and you're not really going to move them. So what we're seeing with the Democrats, we're seeing the emergence of a solid socialist party, a socialist left party, with Obama and the Democrats. They seem to be fine going down that path. What we see in the Republican Party, you have the neocons who are primarily, I'm going to call them neo-Nazis. They're the National Socialists. Now, from my perspective, socialism is socialism. Whether you're going down the left to communism or you're going to the right to Nazism, both end up with dictatorships, both end up with police states, both are bad for democracy. So this is my point, this is my position, and the only saving grace that I see in the Republican Party is if the Republican Party can be kept, and the candidate can be kept, if he gets elected as president, can be kept to this concept of free government, or not free, small government, and getting government out of the people's lives. If we can hold the president to this concept and these ideals, then we'll be able to push forward and build something more substantial. So the goal now is that to sort of highlight the differences between the two, and what's coming up now is, and what we're seeing out of both the left and right, is what we can see in the global news, and this is particularly the Syria-Iran issue. And on both sides of the aisle, you see the major players are rushing to war. And it's the same rhetoric that came out before Iraq is now coming out before Iran. But what's more troubling is to see what's happening on the left, how the left is approaching this. And the left is approaching this, and we saw this in Libya, we saw this from the European side of things, talking about human rights. But what a lot of Americans really don't understand, they don't understand what's going on in terms of why human rights isn't exactly human rights. Human rights, from the left perspective, is the same thing as the preemptive strikes or the war on terror from the right. It's just another terminology. What people have to realize is that politics is about power, attaining power, and then keeping power. That's what politics is all about. It is not a friendly game. And this global politics that's going on now, and is actually what's happening, is we're seeing this sort of geopolitics, the global power struggle playing out. It initially started off in Iran, but when you're seeing now, we're seeing this whole thing about Syria. But Syria is so connected to Iran at this point in time that Syria is the beginning of the Iran-Israeli war. there is a now we call, I'm going to come out and say that there is an Iran-Israeli war going on currently. Currently, it's being fought as a covert war. It's not an overt war. In the annals of in the style of covert wars, you don't come out and say that you're fighting a particular war. The way you do it is you want to stage things so that they appear to be organic and natural. So a lot of what you're seeing in Syria, these so-called freedom fighters, they're not freedom fighters. As bizarre as it sounds, they're Al-Qaeda. They're the Muslim extremists. And as I went through my different video sources, I was able to trace back a lot of the videos that were put up on BBC and so on and so forth on these horrible scenes that were produced from these so-called Syrian freedom fighters. That they weren't from Syrian freedom fighters. They went back to Muslim jihadist sites. This is where the videos ended up leading back to. And as you start seeing them on these more and more Muslim jihadist sites, and you start seeing leaked videos that I have in my library that I'm getting from other sources, showing the staging of events, showing the staging of massacres, showing the Mossad and CIA snipers and intelligence officers inside of Syria, including French mercenaries inside of Syria. This is not a civil war. This is a covert war between Iran and Israel. This is what's going on now. So don't kid yourself and think, oh, this is a civil war. It's not a civil war. What's been going on in the Arab Spring? If you looked at the Al Jazeera website and you went beyond the headlines, and you started digging into what was actually being said and what different groups were being said, particularly going into a lot of the Islamic websites, what you see is that the Arab Spring was not an Arab Spring, but an Islamic Spring. And in each case, in Egypt, Tunisia, even now in Libya, you're getting a more radicalized, a more Islamic government in place of the secular military governments. And this is what's happening in Syria. Syria right now, the Ba'ath Party is not an Islamic party. It is a military, secular party. That's what it is. What the group that are being funded by the UN and the US, and everyone saying we should fund these particular freedom fighter groups, they're actually not. They're not freedom fighters. They're Islamists. They're jihadists. And they have no links to Al-Qaeda. So at this particular point in time, the United States, while it's fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan against Al-Qaeda, is now funding Al-Qaeda and arming it in Syria. Now, this may seem like a shocking contradiction, but it's actually not. This is something that's historical. This is actually how Bin Laden started. Bin Laden was trained and equipped by the U.S. military to fight the Soviets back in the 80s. This was the Soviet war. Afghanistan was, and this is the way it was designed to be, the Soviet Union's Vietnam. The Soviets did to us in Vietnam. They had the guerrilla warfare. They had funded all these different groups and so on and so forth to push the Americans out. But the Americans were actually in there in a wrong position. I'll give an example to tell you what happened in Vietnam. Vietnam, this is a lot of times when American blood is spilt, you're fighting previous mistakes or previous actions. In Vietnam, we were fighting Ho Chi Minh and the North Koreans. The problem that most people don't, the thing that most Americans don't understand is that we created Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was our ally when the French during Nazi Germany were the Vichy French. They were occupied, and they started allying with Germany, and so we trained. The Americans trained. I'm an American, so I say we trained Ho Chi Minh as a guerrilla army to go after the French and the Germans, and they did a very successful job at it. After World War II, while we were supposed to be supporting Ho Chi Minh for independent Vietnam, Truman turned around and said, "No, we're going to support our French colonialist allies and return the French colony, which was Vietnam, back to France." And so instead of supporting the independent Ho Chi Minh, they supported the French puppet government in South Vietnam. So Ho Chi Minh was in North, and the French colonial government was in the South. And it was a decision of the United States under Truman to support the white European allies as opposed to the colored or the Asian northern people who wanted independence, just the way the Americans had independence. As a matter of fact, they went so far that Ho Chi Minh was called Uncle Ho because he was modeling himself after Uncle Sam. They even have the North Vietnamese even had with Ho Chi Minh even had a Declaration of Independence, our American Constitution. But at this period of time, the United States was still fundamentally racist, and it still has an enormous amount of racism in it today. Most support for the United States is preferentially towards white Europeans. And I'm talking about the German, the Germanic, all that, the white area there in Europe. And anyone who is not of that Germanic descent is not white European. So this is where these things are still playing out. The politics is still playing out in that area. So they funded Ho Chi Minh to the point where they were able to beat the Germans, and then once the Germans were defeated, they turned around and tried to destroy what they had created in Vietnam. The Soviets on the other side came in and started backing Ho Chi Minh, and Vietnam turned out the way Vietnam did. In the 80s, this turned around when the Soviets went into Afghanistan to sort of bring Afghanistan back into its fold again, and the United States under Ronald Reagan and the thinking at the time was to arm, train, and fund various insurgent groups within Afghanistan, and one of these groups was the Taliban, and it was Osama bin Laden. So Osama bin Laden and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were trained by the CIA, armed by the CIA, to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. So and the thing is, people say, well, where do all those weapons coming from? Well, and why is the issue with Pakistan? Well, the issue with Pakistan is, well, how do you get weapons into Afghanistan? You create a lawless environment. You go into a lawless environment, and you turn it into a weapons trading ground, a weapons dump, an ammo dump. And this is where the weapons came into Afghanistan was from Pakistan. But they couldn't send in American weapons. They didn't want to be sending in American weapons. So what did they do? These American companies who were arming everybody and selling these weapons, rather than making American weapons, copied and made Soviet weapons. So a lot of, when you see an AK-47 out there, and some this revolution is waving an AK-47 around, going woo, and shooting it in the air, you need to ask yourself whether that is a real Soviet AK-47 or an American-made copy of the Soviet AK-47. Because these do exist, and they're still around, and they're still being produced out there. And so this is where a lot of the weapons come through. This is what's happening in Syria now. You really don't know who is who. You don't know when you're watching a video whether it's produced by a media grouping or whether it's produced by an intelligence agency or a group of intelligence agencies, because we do know that Mossad is in there now. We know that the CIA is in there now. And I've actually got video of this. I've got video of operations inside of Syria by Mossad, by CIA, and by the French. And I've also got operations, these called false flag operations, by Al-Qaeda members inside Syria, working with CIA and Mossad agents. And this is it. You say, well, why does the BBC do all this? Why are they promoting this propaganda? Why does CNN do what it does and promotes this propaganda? Well, again, you have to sort of think yourself, go back into history and realize that these things sit in the context of history. And you will see that, again, this contradiction comes again. Right after the Iranian Revolution that swept Ronald Reagan to power, on the heels of Ronald Reagan's exit from power, you have the Iran-Contra Oliver North scandal, where it was found out that using drug money, because the Mossad and CIA were working with the drug trade in South America. Again, the drug trade in South America is all connected to politics. What I refer to at this point in time is go look up the School of America and see how the Chilean dictators and all this stuff that was going on in terms of these human rights abuses were connected to the United States. Take a look at the Noriega and his fights with the United States. There's a whole background on there that you need to look at. And once you understand this, and then you see that Iran-Contra, where Israel was sending missiles and weapons to Iran, supplied by the United States, you can now understand how Israel and the United States and the Mossad in there are now working with Syrian Al-Qaeda members to overthrow the Syrian government so they can create what in military terms is an open corridor through which they can attack Iran. So what they're doing is they're preparing right now for war with Iran. This is what's going on now. And I'm not talking about, and let me just give you more, let me clarify my terms a little bit better here. They're preparing for a hot war. What's going on right now is a cold war. When you're dealing with smaller conflicts and things that are involved with covert military operations, that's a cold war. When you're dealing with large planes, tanks, and bombs, large, we see in where you have players, the geopolitical players lining up on all the different sides, that's a hot war. What they're preparing for now is a hot war, and this hot war is how they're going to pay for the collapse of the European Union in terms of its financial issues. They're making a lot of money selling weapons and tanks to these groups who are fighting. And they use this money to refinance and pay back the loans, the debt. So people are wondering how they're going to pay back the debt. Where's all this money going to come from? It's simple. They're going to create wars. And this is what's going on now, is you're having this geopolitical struggle going on. In the midst of this debt situation, they're saying, oh, we need to pay off our debts. How do we pay off our debts? Well, let's create a war over here. We sell our weapons into it. They pay us the money, and we pay off our debts. And this is what's going on now. So the war here and this whole thing about human rights, it has nothing to do with human rights. It is not a human rights issue. When you hear these politicians again say, oh, it's about human rights, it's not about human rights. It's about politics, and it's about money. These are the two primary things. The first thing you'll learn as you get into politics, there are no friends in politics. Allies are there simply for your convenience and only in specific issues. Once you're done with a particular issue and you're out, and your mutual interest has disappeared, so does your alliance with these people. And this is standard politics. And this is what goes on behind the headlines that is never discussed in the news. You will never see this in mainstream media, because the mainstream media is part of the political PR machine. These people who are on air, who get paid for for their anchorage, but they have their position. They get paid a good chunk of money to do this, and they will not jeopardize their careers in order to step outside the line and say this is what's actually going on. So you got to remember that when you're watching mainstream news, watching these mainstream media outlets, you're watching either government-sponsored stations where the funding comes primarily from the government, or you're watching corporate news that is funded by a corporation who has vested interest in the outcome of geopolitical events. So this is the context you got to watch your news in. This is what you need to understand about most channels. But you also have to be careful when you go off the mainstream to look and try to see what the bias is of every channel. No matter what channel you go to, even when they claim not to be biased, has a bias. Even my channel has a bias. There's always a bias, even when they say, hey, there's no bias. So what INN is going to be doing with the daily headlines in the Media Watch is that we're going to try to get behind some of these issues. We're going to try to, if you want to see what's really going on, this is the place to come. We will be looking at, coming this week, we'll get more into the Syria event. We'll get into how the presentation actually played itself out in the Korean War and was represented in the TV show MASH. I highly recommend, if you're watching what's going on in Syria and you're watching this whole thing about the war on terrorism, go back and watch the old TV show MASH. There is an enormous amount of information you'll find that is in the show that's relevant today. And this includes an episode where they have a reporter named Clayton Kibbe. And he's a Fox News reporter. Fox is old, because Fox had these newsreels that were played in the theaters. This is before television. And this guy was writing a story, sort of just making things up, because he says the American audience wants to see the drama of war back home. And it's his job to create this drama, to write this drama of war, to not represent the real blood and guts, to not represent the real tragedy of war, but to hide the tragedy of war and create a drama out of it, create entertainment. And so this is where we are today when you're watching media events. The media events on TV, because they're driven by ratings, are entertainment events. This includes 9/11. This is why you saw all the repetition. This is why you saw the flyby graphics. All events on news today is rates driven and is designed for entertainment purposes. It's designed to be dramatic. It's designed to be, this is what it's designed to do. So this is it for today. I will be back tomorrow night. We were a little late today because of Super Tuesday. I wait for the end of the broadcast day when all the news is more or less done. Then I come on with my notes and give you what's been going on. Alrighty. See you tomorrow night.